but I am going to bring on our guest. He should be popping in right now. Adam Schleifer. Did I say it right now? Schleifer?
Schleifer.
Schleifer. Okay, I was close.
Close.
All right, all right, all right.
Don't worry, I've been called worse. It's okay.
so have I. When we're in the studio, we normally do this in a studio in Yonkers. I have a keyboard on the side of me. I have sound effects. At this point, I'll be pushing the applause button, and you'd hear applause right now. I don't have one of those at my house, so just welcome to the show. Yes. So I would like to introduce. Let me say it again. So Schleifer, did I say it right this time?
Yes.
Okay, Adam Schleifer, running in the New York 17 Congressional District. Real quick, so what inspired you, or what made you want to run in this race? It's a heated race. You had like almost a soccer team in the beginning, and now it's down to 8 candidates. You were one of the latter candidates to join the race. Were you? You weren't one of the first ones that I knew about. I think you came a little
probably
later.
Was in the middle, I think.
Right, because a couple of them came out before I knew
I was
that.
probably around the middle.
Yeah, a couple came out before I knew Neil Lowy was retiring. And then a couple of y'all came out after she made the announcement. I think you came out after she made the announcement.
Yeah, one candidate sort of challenged her before she had decided whether she would seek re-election or quote unquote primaried her. And then right. I think the rest announced, like 30 seconds after she announced she wasn't seeking re-election. A few others waited a little while. I spent a few weeks thinking about it after I learned she wasn't seeking re-election, and I did some soul searching and talked to some folks and tried to figure out if I could add value and really bring something to my hometown district. And once I talked to the folks I respected and got my wife's permission, I decided to enter the race. So I got going in November, and I think we officially announced right before Thanksgiving. So
we underplay that, how important that is, getting the wife's permission. That's very important in making these kind of decisions.
Yes. Yes.
So I see that I wrote a couple of things down. I saw a quote by you that I thought was a great soundbite, but I wanted to get you to speak on it. To improve access, let's reward participation in and remove obstacles to democracy. I see that if elected, you would like to sponsor the Voting Rights Act 2020 to help protect voting rights and election integrity. Speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I wrote an interesting piece. I thought it was interesting, at least. I wrote a piece about trying to do two things: increase our participation in democracy, but also make it more fair so that, in the words of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., folks have something for which to vote also, because he spoke about that in his famous I Have a Dream speech, that in the South at the time he said, people are denied the vote, and in the North, they don't know that they have anything for which to vote. And so today in 2020, we're 60 years after that almost, and we're still at a place in our country where people are unfortunately both denied the right to vote sometimes, and a lot of states, particularly in our South, still try to disincentivize and put obstacles in front of people and the right to vote, particularly people of color, particularly Black folks in the South. That's been hundreds of years that they've been doing that. And on the other hand, we also have on the other hand, a sense in which we don't participate enough. So what do I want to do? A few things. One, I want to abolish the Electoral College. I wrote an article about that in a law review when I was in law school 15 years ago. I think the Electoral College makes it so that nobody's vote matters in not only in New York and California, but even Texas, that only a few battleground states, their vote matters. So there's ways to do that. We could get a constitutional amendment, or we can have the states come together and enter into a contract. And they say, as long as a majority of us get together, we'll all send our votes to the winner of the national popular vote. And they can make a deal to do that. And it's called the National Popular Vote Plan. I believe it may be at npv.org or something like that. People can look it up. So that's a big priority of mine. Another one is, we have lower voter participation rates than in many other developed countries and even some undeveloped countries. So I think we should give every American $50, every American citizen, every voter, $50 to vote in a federal election. It's progressive. It's a way to incentivize more people to vote. It's a way to address the people who have hourly wages or they got to take on childcare or other things to get them to vote. And so it'll help compensate those who have a financial burden to vote. And it'll be like a progressive tax break for the working class folks. I mean, it means a lot more for the working class folks to get $50 than for the wealthiest. So in that sense, it's progressive. So I want to give everybody $50 in their pocket if they just show up and vote. Doesn't matter who they vote for.
Now you said $50 or $50 tax credit, because I saw a $50 tax credit. Is that the same thing?
A tax credit would be the way to do it, so that if you do it, then when you file your taxes that year, basically you get the $50 back.
Okay.
And so that's a big priority of mine. And then the third thing is, at least every 4 years, we should have a national holiday for the presidential elections, I believe. That's another thing. And we should do more to encourage the states to have automatic voter registration. So when you go to get your driver's license, it's that much more easy for you to be registered to vote. So
Yeah.
I think those things are important. Now, let me touch on one more thing on that, which is gerrymandering. You know, in this country, we have too many places that are too bitter, too divided, too partisan, and too extreme. And one of the reasons is because take a guy like Eric Cantor, Republican, pretty extreme guy, right-wing guy. He got knocked off by a guy even more right-wing, an extremist in the Tea Party. His fear of that stuff and the fear of the classic representative in Congress, that if they're not extreme, they're going to lose because they're going to get primaried by someone more extreme in their party. That's because of the districts we draw and the way they're all distorted. And so if we could have Congress, it's not, people don't know this, but in Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, it gives Congress the power to draw election districts. And they don't do it. They let the states do it, but Congress has the power. So my view is we should have Congress drawing our districts, and we could tell people, even Republicans, we could say it's in your interest because you're running scared from the most extreme NRA gun nuts on the far, far right, and you're afraid you're going to lose if you stand up to be a moderate, thoughtful person. So it's in your interest, too, to draw these districts in a fair way. And the Supreme Court let us down this year because they said that they have no role in making our districts more fair and less distorted. So my view is Congress should just do it through its own legislation.
Now, while I like how a lot of that sounds, the Republicans, you have to work with the Republicans who are benefiting somewhat from the voter suppression, like what we had in Georgia in the midterm elections with Stacey Abrams and now Governor Kemp, who was head of the Board of Elections and made the decisions on how the election was going to be in the election he was in, which, you know, should not be. I was down there, I have family down there, I was visiting, did a lot of live videos and down there about that. But and you know, the Republicans actually run, unless you flip those seats right now, they're in power. So how do you get them to go along with what you're talking about when they benefit from it?
Yeah, so 3 things. So let's start with the Electoral College. You tell folks in Texas, pretty red state, you benefit too. Because if you agree to get rid of the Electoral College, your votes in Texas matter. Right now, nobody pays attention to you in Alabama, in Texas, in Alaska, and all these safe red states because they know they got your vote in the Electoral College. So they have an incentive on that one to do what we can do because they want their votes to matter. And by the way, most years, the popular vote, it's like 49 to 51. So it's not clear that one party or the other always benefits that much. So that's 1. 2, when it comes to the gerrymandered districts, like I said, I think a lot of the Republicans in Congress who just want to keep their seats, they have an incentive to have less extremism so that they can be more reasonable and not be held hostage to their most extreme. And then the third thing is on the tax credit for voting. You know, the Republican Party says they love to lower taxes, right? But they don't say they love to suppress the vote. They don't admit that. If you say to them, hey, you want to be joining me and pass a law that says, let's give everybody $50 in their pocket in a form of a tax credit for voting, and they say no, well, then we know they have to admit out loud that they like suppressing the vote, and unfortunately in the South, often the black vote, more than they like reducing taxes. So I think it's important to at least put that to them and make them choose in a public way.
You know, but right now, shaming them or getting them to do the right thing seems not to be working. And again, they benefit from a lower turnout when a lot of us do not show up. So to encourage a larger turnout is against their interests, really.
Yeah, look, I mean, you can only do so much, but I think making them go on the record of turning down the $50 per person tax credit is a way of having them admit they're trying to get the lower turnout. It's something they don't admit. They usually say something like, we like turnout too, we're just afraid about fraud. So if we say,
Right.
well, how about the $50 credit? If they say no to that, then you say, okay, what's wrong with that? I thought you want to reduce taxes. The other thing,
Mhm.
let me say something about shaming. You brought up a good point. You know, we just had, what, 2 weeks ago, the horrible example of Ahmaud Arbery, right?
Yes.
And there's no reason why it should have taken a national shaming campaign, which is basically what it was, to get them to give a closer look and investigate that crime. And I'm a former federal prosecutor. I don't believe that all law enforcement is evil. In fact, I think most people in law enforcement, whether they're police officers, prosecutors, I think that most of those people are risking their lives to try to make us all safer. Let me be real clear on that. But that said, when I see something like that and I see that nothing's really getting done, and I called for a grand jury investigation on that, and I was glad when they said they would look into it in Georgia. But it does make you wonder, why did it take the nation rising up and putting a spotlight with that video on that for them to get going on that? And so I do think raising this to the public consciousness, that's important in certain places where people are kind of fixed in their ways, and those ways are often the wrong ways.
I mean, our history has shown us that that is one effective way to get people to move. If they didn't have the uprising in Ferguson, Eric Holder, the feds would never have come in and investigated and at least looked at the situation. It would have, and that goes on and on through a lot of these cases. A lot of these cases where you don't have that, there's, well, even in Ferguson, there was no justice. But you don't have justice and you don't have nobody looking at it. The grand jury does not indict, which they can indict a ham sandwich they always brag about, but they do not indict. They find no way to indict none of these situations. And, you have to understand, in our community, when you keep seeing that over and over and over, you kind of lose all hope for that the government is ever going to do what's the right thing to do in their interests.
Yeah, I mean, that trust deficit is important. And look, I've seen it. Probably my most influential colleague in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the head of the criminal division, was and sort of one of my personal professional heroes, is a man named Lawrence Middleton, born in the South, in what was probably still the pretty racist South. And he went into the JAG Corps and he thought he was going to do defense work, and he became a federal prosecutor. And he probably, I won't put words in his mouth, so I won't explain why he did it, but he found himself being a federal prosecutor as a young black man from the South. This was in Los Angeles, and he prosecuted the folks the two police officers who beat up Rodney King. And he was my mentor, and he did a lot for me in my career early on. He did everything for me, and he was my sort of most important professional influence there. And I think it was really inspiring for me to watch him. And he oversaw the unit, by the way, that also ended up convicting the sheriff of Los Angeles County and I saw the Lawrence Middleton, who was a black man running our criminal division, fighting for justice, including when it was police corruption or official corruption and brutality. And I think that matters. And I think one of the ways we can improve and heal and ensure and restore faith is to have a diverse set of law enforcement officers and prosecutors and judges, so that it's people understand that you get a fair shake, and that it's not your wealth, it's not your religion, and it's not your color in that way.
I wanted to talk, I do want to go to the former assistant U.S. attorney part, but before that, I wanted to go back to the voting thing. I read that, that's what you would like to do if elected, but you still want to continue your mission to end electoral college and incentivize states to expand. Expand the absentee ballot and early voting during Corona.
Yeah.
And make the election day a federal holiday. So you want to speak a little bit more about that, especially the COVID part.
No, I mean, I support what Governor Cuomo's and the legislature in New York has been doing. liberalize the absentee ballot process. Right now, as folks should know this, you can apply, you're going to get in the mail, or you could do it online, but you should get in the mail a postcard type thing, a mailer, which is pre-stamped. You don't have to spend any money. You put it back in the mail, applying for a ballot, and you fill in the box that says health reasons, and then you get a ballot in the mail. And so this year, we won't have that mess like we had in Wisconsin, where everybody's lining up around the block 5 times. No, you can vote from home this year by mail, and there's early voting too. So if you want to go in person, which is still open, and hopefully within a month from now it'll be healthier and more safe because we're getting on the other side of this thing. Hopefully you can go, but you don't only have to go on June 23rd. Early voting will mean you can go in the days beforehand, in those few days before the election itself. So you either have to send in your ballot on June 22nd, or you can vote in the days going up to June 23rd and June 23rd. And I support that because we shouldn't have to have people choosing between their health and participation in democracy. And I'm glad that New York's leading the way on that.
Now, piggybacking off what you just said, with everybody talking about reopening.
Yeah.
And I just read an email from the Greenberg superintendent. He's getting a lot of calls that people are not, they're not obeying the social distancing and the walking trails and everything. And, they even suggested maybe making a certain time in the morning just for the seniors and the elderly so they can be safe. But I used that, I just read that about an hour ago. How do you feel about this whole thing? Because the whole reopening and with people not observing the social distancing and a further spread, a further outbreak.
Yeah, we're balancing a lot of tough risks here. And, the governor's done a great job. I'm proud to have worked for him. I'm proud that we have a leader here who understands that things can change and that we don't have all the answers, but we just got to follow the latest facts as we have them. Let science do the talking, not our ideologies. Not being afraid to ask the tough questions and then just react. And I think you saw with the president, he was told about the risks. He fired the people responsible early on for investigating this. And then they said, you got to start testing. And he said, why do I want to test? If I test, I could get a bad answer, which is nuts. And then later he starts saying stuff like, you know how I know testing doesn't work? Because somebody tested negative last week. Now they tested positive. I mean, it's like he doesn't understand that, maybe they just got the disease in the last week. So when you see that kind of nonsense out of Washington, and then you see what we have in New York, it makes you grateful. And it makes you grateful we have a federal system where we have a governor and not just the president, one for the whole country. And so, look, the governor's doing this in phases. We have a plan. You have to hit all the benchmarks, and then you slowly open, through the phases. And so we're going to start this process. We're going to do our best. We got to make sure we can get our economy going while staying safe. These are tough things to balance. My hope is we continue to buy time and do it really carefully. We stay careful because I don't know if you've done this, but I've gone to a family member's house where you stand kind of like across the way and you're like 10 feet away, and it's easy to start to forget. You got to keep reminding yourself, don't go over and give somebody a hug that you're used to seeing.
Right.
It's a tough instinct, and so we're social people. Humans are social, and so we're going to want to do it. We got to be careful, and so I think we got to try. We'll see how it goes, and hopefully we just got to stay very incremental and keep watching what happens. And if it starts to look like it goes up, we pull back a little. But I do think it's a good idea to try to get people back to work, because here's a stat I learned: like 80% of America can't miss a number of paychecks in a row. They don't have substantial savings.
Right. They said a lot of Americans are 3 to 4 paychecks away from being homeless.
That's right. Right. So if you got 3 paychecks, we've missed 3 paychecks. Now we've done some stimulus, but at some point it is important to get the economy moving and to ensure that, because if people run out of cash, 70% of our whole economy is consumer driven by American consumers. So you can imagine how bad it would be. So look, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to be careful, and we'll see how it goes. I'm almost more concerned, honestly, for the rest of the country, because we have the arrogance of ignorance in a lot of places. In rural America, we see now people don't believe, and there's this ideology thing. People act like Republicans are against face masks and Democrats are in favor of face masks itself. That's nonsense. Coronavirus isn't a Democrat. It isn't a Republican, right? It doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't know parties. So my concern is almost more for the places in this country that we consider very deep red, that believe this is all some kind of liberal conspiracy. I'm worried that the boomerang is going to hit them really hard. By the way, they think that it's like there's some moral failing, that's why we got corona harder in New York. Like the Mitch McConnells kind of think like we did something wrong to get this. The answer is we got more of it because in New York City, you got density like this. And next door in New Jersey is the most population dense state in America. So the reason why we have more corona is because we got people living closer to one another.
Right. The city I live in Mount Vernon, is one of the most dense populated cities in New York State. We have actually a question from the audience, from a listener. He asks, what kind of legislation would you sponsor that would strengthen and expand laws and the definition of hate crimes?
So this is an interesting question because there is a great law that people don't know about that I called for to be enforced, and it was, thankfully. They filed charges. Up in Muncie and Rockland, in a Hasidic community, a man who seems to be somewhat mentally disturbed did an act of domestic terrorism and anti-Semitism, and he attacked them with a machete. And by the way, what's sad about that is I had to even be thankful when it happened. Thank God he didn't have a gun. But somebody died who took a machete into the brain. Eventually he died. And what I pointed out then, okay, is that there is an existing law, the Matthew Shepard, and I think it's Thomas Byrd. I can't remember Byrd's first name, but the Matthew Shepard and Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Act, James Byrd maybe. And let me tell you about that law. It is a law that was passed to address hate crime and hate and violence against people on account of their color or race or ethnicity or sex or sexual identity. And it protects, it protects an Orthodox Jew celebrating Hanukkah, just like it protects Matthew Shepard, a young gay man who was murdered for being gay, just like it protects Mr. Byrd, who was dragged through the streets and tortured and murdered for being a black man, I believe, in the South. And so there is a law out there, and it's important that we use it and enforce it. And what's beautiful to me about it is it kind of can unite us all together because it stands up for hate against every kind of, in all of its forms. And so that's one thing. And, so I think we need to use the laws we have, including that, and then look at whether we need more at other levels of government. But we do have a great hate crime act at the federal level, and I was calling for its use in that case, and I think we should use it more often.
The person who asked is from Greenberg. In the Greenberg community, White Plains Greenberg community, about 7-8 years ago was the Kenneth Chamberlain situation. African-American male, retired veteran from the military, from the Marines, retired from the Westchester Department of Corrections. He fell asleep and hit his life aid alert, and the police were called for a welfare check, and it ended up turning into them breaking down his door, beanbagging him, tasing him, and killing him. And in the process, when he said, he was standing up for his rights, they said the words to him, and it's on the Life Aid recording has this. You can look it up. After this, you can Google it. You'll find the recording. And they said, "We don't give a F, nigger." And they called him the N-word a few times. Janet DeFiore, who was the Westchester District Attorney at the time, said that doesn't fall on being a hate crime. The use of the N-word was just a distraction for the cops to be able to obtain entry into his apartment. And she says that on the record as well. So, I mean, I was just saying that's a situation that happened in the neighborhood of the person asking the question. A story that we've covered extensively. I'm
very proud of my colleagues that I worked with in the U.S. Attorney's Office who took on cases of police brutality like that, because first step is we have to all trust that our police officers will obey the law before they will enforce it. And so it sounds like that was not an example of that, obviously.
No. Also, I see, and I brought that up because I see that on your site, one of the things you talk about is fighting for social justice. So we want to speak on that briefly, real quick.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to a few things. I was influenced by this, by my family. My grandfather and grandmother were enslaved in Europe during the Holocaust. They were forced to make weapons in a Nazi weapons factory. My grandpa was a hero because he sabotaged those weapons he was supposed to be making. But his entire family was murdered. His mother, father, sister, brother, grandparents. And my grandmother lost every single one of her siblings, all 6 of them except one. So my grandparents came here having all of their family members murdered for being who they were as Jews in Europe, having been enslaved, having only a 7th grade education and couldn't speak English. And they came here in 1947 with that experience. I didn't get to meet my grandmother, she died, but I grew up with my grandfather, who was my best friend and first friend and babysitter, because my mom was in law school when she had me. So she would drop me off on the way to St. John's at his house in Queens, and then go to class, and then pick me up on the way home. And so I learned from him at an early age, social justice, because I learned from him the consequences of hate and discrimination and what he went through, and how also he had love in his heart and wasn't bitter from the experience as much as it hurt him to remember, what he went through. And the same thing with my brother, who's special needs. And, I watched my mom struggle with my brother, who I grew up close to. We shared a bedroom for a number of years when he was born. He has a tougher road in life than I have. And what I watched my mom do is use her legal training to stand up for him and advocate for him and get him the BOCES programming and the other stuff he needed in school. We both graduated public school, even though my brother, with all his disabilities and special needs, he was able to get the support he needed, graduate from public high school in his own way. But my mom learned from that, and I watched her when I was a teenager and in college take what she learned advocating for my brother and join something called Student Advocacy, which is an organization that I think is in Elmsford and focuses on the Yonkers School District, Mount Vernon School District, in Elmsford in the schools, and advocates for kids so that they get the resources they need. And if there's like a fight or a problem and they're going to get expelled or suspended, she did free legal work to help them and prevent them from getting kicked out of school. And so I watched what she did, and that's been an early influence on me my whole life. And what I did for that, to further that myself, is, for example, when I went to work for Governor Cuomo as a consumer protection regulator, I don't know if you remember this. Remember those commercials with Montel Williams for payday loans?
Yes.
So those are very popular commercials because he's a smooth guy, and they chose him because he was a veteran and because he had high trust scores with veterans and also people of color. And those were terrible products because you advertise for them, basically, hey, you got a problem, your boiler broke, your transmission broke, you want to go take a cruise with your friend, go to moneymutual.com, no questions asked, you get $2,000 right away. Problem is, nothing in life is that easy, right? And so you take out that $2,000 loan, you could be ending up paying, $20,000 in debt before you can get out from it, because it's like 1,300% a year, some of those loans. And the whole business model was built on trapping people in cycles of debt. And so I saw that, and I saw those ads, and I said, that's not fair and that's illegal, because New York doesn't allow you to loan money at that rate. So I brought a legal action against them. I took that commercial off the air. That's why you don't see that commercial anymore. And I took that product out of New York so that people wouldn't be tricked into these kinds of predatory products. So I think that started with the examples of my family, but that's what I did in my career as a lawyer, to use those tools I had to stand up for people and make sure they got justice.
I did a series of stories when I was living in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta for 10 years. That's where I saw so many of these payday loan places, and it's like legal loan sharking, like, yeah, basically. But I did. I spoke on it just before I brought you in. I ran a story in the last 24, 48 hours on Westchester students filing a civil rights lawsuit against Mamaroneck School District for failing to address egregious racial harassment. And as an extensive, it's two siblings, And one of them started as early as second grade, and it's just a length of stuff that they did. And I think it's a shame that children have to file a civil rights lawsuit against a school district in 2020. And since you were talking about that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I'd like you to read up on that.
I'll take a look.
It's definitely on Black Westchester. Now, one question you were talking about parents, and I did read your mother was an advocate, but I was reading a Lohan article, and I would like to ask the same question they did. Your father being the founder of a pharmaceutical company, I repeat and ask the same question that Lohan asked in their interview. How will you tackle the influence of the pharmaceutical companies being the son of owner of a pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, so my dad founded a company called Regeneron, which for 25 years was unprofitable. And I watched him. He's a tremendous influence and hero of mine, because for 25 years, they tried to develop treatments that would help people, and they failed. And they kept at it, and they kept working. And in 2011, I believe, they developed their first big helpful treatment, which cured blindness. And so when I was 30 years old, I watched finally my dad, who had been working for 25 years, finally had success. He had a lot of failures along the way when I was a kid. And when I watched him succeed, I was very proud of him. Since then, they've cured forms of asthma, eczema, and Ebola. And now they're working on the cure for coronavirus. So I'm very proud of the work that all the great people do. They employ like 5,000 or 6,000 people in this district in Tarrytown, in the town of Greenburgh. And so let me just say right away, because there's a lot of different kinds of pharmaceutical companies, quote unquote. What they're doing there is they're saving lives and improving lives. And I'm proud of the work that all the scientists are doing there to use science to make the world better. And by the way, they sponsor a science talent program for high school kids, so that high school kids can learn science and STEM and go in those careers. So I'm proud of them. So now to answer your question, that's what they do. I'm independent of them. I don't work for them. I'm not an employee of theirs. But I do believe that we need to do better when it comes to making quality, affordable healthcare for everyone. So my plan, which is up on my website, is at least as aggressive as others in the race in terms of capping prescription drug prices, so that nobody has out-of-pocket costs, that healthcare companies should cover the costs, and up to a certain point, somebody could have a copay, but you can't go broke getting a drug you need. And then ensuring that we don't have people doing what like that Martin Shkreli guy did. I know you have a hip hop background on some level. So, the Wu-Tang, the guy who bought that Wu-Tang record, right? Yes. That guy deserved to go to jail. That guy was a bad dude who basically just cornered a market on some old technology. He didn't develop something new. He didn't invent anything. He just bought up the supply of some old antibiotics, other stuff, and then sold it for a rip-off price. We have to crack down on people like that. I'm the first person to say that. And I think there's a lot of abuse that needs to be taken on, with whether it's insulin for diabetics, it's EpiPens for kids allergic to different things. We need to make sure people who aren't inventing stuff aren't able to corner a market and monopolize it and rip people off. So you'll see on my website, we've got a healthcare platform there. And I believe that hopefully, if we have a strong public option, my hope is over the next years, we'll be able to outcompete insurance plans and make them obsolete, and so that we have public insurance. That's my hope.
One person responded to that. They said Regeneron. I think is that I pronounce it right?
Regeneron.
Regeneron came under fire for charging $14,600 for a cholesterol drug, prevalent. Even when the cost sharing under Medicaid Part D, seniors were still responsible for $1,800 in annual out-of-pocket costs. And then he sends a link to an article. So I just wonder, that was one comment from what you just said. I see something that you speak a lot about, and you actually wrote an op-ed for the Harvard Kennedy School Review on the 19th about ending gun violence. I personally live in a city, Mount Vernon, where there's a lot of senseless gun violence and unsolved homicides, and I know a lot of Black neighborhoods echo that. So what are your thoughts on ending gun violence? And speak on that.
Yeah. So, when I was in first grade in New York City public school, PS6, a little boy put a gun on me, loaded handgun. And I didn't realize that day that it was a real gun. I thought it was a toy when he was doing it, but he was putting it right up against me. And then I learned later, I think the next day, my mom told me a story had come out in the news about it and that it was a real gun. And so I had an early brush with that. I'm fortunate to say I've only had one other time when I had a near scary incident with gun violence. One other time in college, I saw somebody sort of put a gun up on me. But I'm fortunate that that's the extent of it. But it's a personal thing for me. I've experienced it myself. So has I know Asha Castleberry Hernandez has another story of her experience in White Plains where she had an issue with gun violence. I mean, it's a horrible thing that since I was in first grade, we've seen a generation of children suffer in schools under fear of gun violence. And as a prosecutor, I was very proud to take dozens of illegally possessed and illegal weapons and assault rifles and high-capacity handguns off the streets. I made that a priority of my work, and I saw the way that gun violence can squander the potential of communities, and the way that if you can take the guns and the bullets away from those communities, kids can get back outside, can play without being afraid, without being intimidated. And so that was a major part of what I did as a prosecutor. I'm proud of it. There's nothing more important to me, I think, maybe curing or surviving Corona, getting our economy back on track. The sadness with gun violence is it's so self-inflicted, right? I mean, it's a plague that we're causing on ourselves. So we got to have, just like you have a driver's license, every single person who possesses a firearm should have to have a license, every single person. And then what we need is a ban on things like assault rifles. This isn't a war zone. We live in a domestic civil society. We shouldn't have weapons of war on our streets, and then we need red flag laws. So if you're going through a mental crisis, there's domestic violence problems, any of that stuff, you're not allowed to possess your gun until that constraint item. And so that's a huge priority for me, and we need to continue to work on it. And my hope is when we deal with some of that gerrymandering stuff and we have less extreme Republicans, they'll have a little bit more courage to stop holding out on that.
Shout out to Asha Castleberry Hernandez. I see that she had tweeted that the loss of her grandfather yesterday, I believe her grandfather, and on top of her grandfather's son had died before that, and she was just dealing with that. So I just want to offer my condolences and my prayers to that family as well. Since you had mentioned her name, reminded me, I wanted to publicly do that for Black Westchester.
Yeah, and our thoughts are with her. We sent word to her of condolences earlier today as well.
I actually did see that on Twitter. I saw that you tweeted her back too.
And by the way, that's something I want to talk about. Can I just mention, it's a shame, but it's the truth that the Black community and the communities of color are suffering mortality rates that are like almost double other communities when it comes to coronavirus. And our Surgeon General's pointed that out, and others have pointed that out. And it's an issue, it's a problem. And what it really shows is with making access to preventative care and healthcare coverage, we need to close that 8.5% that isn't covered. We need to get them covered. We need preventative care, and we need to do better by our least well off and our communities of color so that they don't have the other health risks that make them more at risk when something like this comes around. Another aspect of that is nutrition, right? I mean, we need more of those Whole Foods 365s and other good, healthy options in all neighborhoods, not just in the wealthiest neighborhoods and the least diverse neighborhoods, so that you can get quality, affordable, healthy food, which is a huge part of course, preventative medicine and health. So we need to all do better at that. And unfortunately, the results we're seeing now show we still have a long way to go.
My partner, David Jones, that we started this 6 years ago, actually, he just started plant-based living, a website, and he's promoting the eating of more plant-based foods and eating more vegetables and fruits to get your vitamin C, to get your immune system up, and staying healthy, because one of the self-inflicted things in our community as far as health is concerned, and I speak personally, and then I came off a scare recently 2 years ago, is the food that we eat, what we put into our body and use in our body has a lot to do with the the health issues in our community. And there is a, you know, food deserts and a lack of healthy food in the area for you to go to get, and you know, a wealth of the McDonald's and Popeyes and, you know, Church's Chicken type things. You know what I mean? Like, and that is a concern, and we deal with that. And on Saturdays he does a special edition, health and wellness Saturdays, and I just spoke him up, so I will let him speak on it himself. He is there. He's tuned in. He must have heard us talk about him. Damon, are you there? I don't see your video yet. I don't see your audio yet. Your video is not connected. But yeah, that's definitely yes, Damon, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Did you hear the conversation as we got to you just now?
No.
Adam was talking about the need for healthier eating, and one of the situations as far as helping prevent the health situations in our community. He was just speaking on that, and I was talking about your plant-based.
Oh yeah.
So if you have a question about it, he was just speaking on that. If you want to ask him something regarding that.
Oh well, you know, as you're running for office, and we do see a need in addressing the issue of the American diet.
Yeah.
Like what will be your goals to trying to look at the American diet and the recommendations from the I can't even think of the name right now, for us to have certain dietary the dietary guidelines, right?
Yeah.
They had Dr. Milton Mills, who's an advocate for plant-based eating and a vegetarian vegan lifestyle. He also had produced a report saying that the dietary guidelines was biased because it recommends dairy, but 80% of people of color are lactose intolerant, and a lot of the other illnesses that dairy brings on. What would your agenda be, you know, in addressing the different dietary guidelines and addressing the need for, especially in the Black communities and poor communities, for much healthier eating and more fresh vegetables and a healthier lifestyle, so we won't have these pre-existing conditions that leave us as targets to something like COVID-19.
Yeah, no, that's what we were just talking about, Damon. So thanks for bringing it up. And I'll say it's interesting. You know, a lot of Jewish folks also have some lactose intolerance. As I studied it once, I think there are two centers of where. So there's a gene that turns on and off the lactase enzyme in people. And basically what happened is there were two spots in the world, like, I don't know what, thousands of years ago, where they came to domesticate cattle. One of them was in like southeastern Africa, not where maybe a lot of African Americans are from the Western Africa. The other one was like in Germany area or Central Europe. So basically those two communities, which spread it to a lot of Europe, have lactose. They can handle milk better than the rest of the world. A lot of Asians are lactose intolerant. A lot of Jewish community can be lactose intolerant. A lot of people are lactose intolerant. So that's an interesting scientific issue. And so that's an interesting point. I would say more globally, you know, we need to do better from an environmental, from an ethical standpoint. Everything leads us to say, eat less meat. A lot of people, I don't eat a lot of red meat. I haven't totally given it up. I'm aspiring, but it's hard to do.
It's understandable.
Yeah, I'm not there either. So
it's a process.
I'm getting close. I mean, I gotta say, I don't know if I could ever get away from chicken, but I'll try. And fish, I love. But the less we eat of that stuff, the more healthy we'll be. I think from a federal government standpoint, let's start with the kids.
Right.
Well, the Trump administration, as I remember it, rolled back some of the healthy food initiatives that the Obama administration had put into schools. Because what we all understand is the Department of Agriculture, you know, and our education system, they put out a lot of food into, you know, the front lines of where kids learn habits there in their school day. Some kids eat 2 meals a day in school.
Right.
So we have to have the right kind of foods at schools. You know, when I was a kid, probably you too, when I went to public school, you know, you just got like the sloppy Joe one day, then like the fish sticks the next day, you know, then pizza was a big day. I think Fridays was pizza. You know, that's not exactly like the healthiest menu if you think about it.
No.
And so we need to do better at feeding our kids in schools in a healthy way and teaching them early by both
Right.
lesson and example of what healthy eating is, and not having like Lay's
Exactly.
chips in all the vending machines. You know, get something more healthy in there. And so look, the federal government has a role in that, the Department of Agriculture has a role in that, and we need to make sure our guidelines are more clear on that too. So I think there is a role for Congress to make sure that that happens.
Yeah.
What you have a question from the young lady in Greenberg. She said, "How will you address food deserts?" In the New York 17 Congressional District, the Fairfield section of Greenberg is the fourth largest African American community in New York State, and she's saying there's food deserts there.
Yeah, so that's a problem. It's mostly, I think, probably more of a local problem in terms of like getting the actual stores in that area. From a federal perspective, that reaches down pretty micro to that level. But I do think it's a good, important goal to have. And I have to think more about how the federal government's policy can help incentivize. I certainly think one thing they can do is have tax incentives so that certain kinds of businesses, and we can define that as having like, you know, certain kinds of supermarkets or whatever it would be, could get incentives to locate in an area where it's a defined area where there is a food desert, so to speak. So I think that's one way the federal government might be able to help out with that.
Now, another topic that seems to be popular and a lot of people talk about during campaigns, I see that you would like to regulate and tax marijuana, so legalize marijuana?
Yeah, so I wrote a whole thing on this. I wrote an op-ed. This comes out of my experience as a federal prosecutor. I'm not, and let me just say what I'm for and what I'm not for. I'm not for legalization of all drugs, and I'm not saying people should smoke marijuana or should not smoke marijuana. What I'm saying is marijuana has the scientific health profile of something not so different, let's say, maybe even healthier than alcohol and cigarette. Criminalize that with alcohol. So all I'm saying is we should decriminalize, regulate, quality control, and tax marijuana. Why? Well, first of all, when I was a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted some international drug cartels in Mexico, and I learned about their history. And I learned they make billions a year from marijuana. My view is, why are we giving billions a year to Mexican drug cartels to shoot up and destroy their own society in Mexico and their innocent people in Central America and our country, if we could have farmers in this country making that money instead? And if we could have the FDA controlling the quality so we don't have kids vaping this gray market stuff that we still see, which kills some of them. My view is we should have it fully decriminalized, regulated and quality controlled, and then taxed. And by the way, that would do a lot, particularly in some urban communities and communities of color where they've unfairly been harmed by marijuana policy for the last 70 years, that they should get some of the economic benefits of that as well. What I mean by that is, you know, I remember walking around the streets of the city for the last, 20-something years, and you see all the time, unfortunately, young Black kids, you know, get busted in the subway and elsewhere for possessing small amounts of marijuana over these last decades. It's changed recently, I know. And then that puts them into the criminal justice system. And it creates all sorts of effects that make it harder for them to do other stuff. And it's like a one-way street down the criminal justice system when a lot of kids who look like me were walking around with joints, smoking joints like it was totally legal. And so there's been a racial disparity to the way that marijuana was enforced as a criminal justice matter. And that's another aspect of this. So my view is we should decriminalize it, regulate it, legalize it, and tax it.
How did you feel about the criminal justice reforms that was rolled out and the reform of the reform that's supposed to be rolling out in July?
Yeah, so I'm not, you know, we're running for Congress. It's more of a state issue. So I don't want to act like I don't want to confuse folks and say that I get to control what the state does. What I'm trying to do now is, run for the federal government in Congress. And my experience as a prosecutor was at the federal level. What I learned from the federal level is what they do there is they look at your danger and your flight risk. And they say, are you going to run away and not show up for your next hearing? And are you going to be a danger to people in the community? And I used to do those hearings, and I was proud to say, you know, I had a lot of fraudsters who I convinced judges these fraudsters are dangerous to their community because they're running around stealing from people. And I had people detained for fraud crimes pending trial. And there were other cases where we didn't detain them. The point is, I think New York had a problem. The problem was mostly a problem of Rikers and too few judges giving too few hearings early enough for folks, and folks were rotting in jail in Rikers, and that was unacceptable. So that was the problem, and we needed to do a better job so that money doesn't control who gets a bail hearing or not. My view is the $500, whether you have it or not, it's irrelevant to whether or not you're really a danger or a flight risk. So we had a bad system, and I'm glad we tried to change it. I think the first wave of reform went too far, probably in the following way. They said entire crimes like burglary. They said anybody who commits a burglary, you can never be detained pre-trial. It's not a serious enough crime. Well, to me, that didn't make a lot of sense. There are some burglars, you know, somebody who breaks into your house in the middle of the night, that could be a dangerous person, and that's a pretty dangerous crime, and that leads to a lot of violence. Somebody breaks in your house in the middle of the night, what are you going to say? Hello, what are you doing here? No, there's going to be some violence that breaks out. So my view is the reform of the reforms, I think, is probably headed in the right way, where it's not as big of a one-size-fits-all, and it's more focused on, you know, evaluating whether or not specific cases present a danger or not. But I do believe we did have a problem at first, which was whether or not you could put up the initial few $100 had too big of a role in whether you rot in jail. So we need also, by the way, more judges and quicker hearings.
Now, as a federal prosecutor, were you involved in any of the cases of African Americans killed by law enforcement, and whether they were brought to justice or not? Or were you involved in any of those cases?
No, I was not. I actually applied for that unit, which was called the Public Corruption and Civil Rights Unit. And I got my other choice, my second choice, which was the Major Frauds Unit, where I took on mostly major financial scammers. But I had interest in that unit, but I didn't join that unit.
Well, I did see that you were involved. Okay, go ahead.
That's what I was mentioning earlier, is that probably my biggest mentor and hero in that office was the head of that section. I was very proud to see the work they were doing. And like I said, they ended up investigating and convicting the sheriff of Los Angeles County of corruption and abuses.
Well, and I see also you were involved in Operation Varsity Blues.
Yeah.
The college, the parents that were paying extra money or whatever to get their kids into colleges and stuff. So if you wanted to speak about that briefly.
Yeah, no, I had a small role in that, but I was proud to help. Basically, that case was investigated out of Boston. It was charged out of Boston, and it's going to be tried out of Boston. But I happened to be friends with the prosecutor who was leading that investigation. And so when it turned out they were going to have what's called a takedown, they were going to, you know, bring in and arrest and arraign all these folks in Los Angeles, all these celebrities. I got a call, and he said, you know, basically, can you help out with this? And so I did, and I'm proud to have helped him. And I gotten, you know, there was some press that came out of it because basically I had to use the restroom in the middle of a long set. And so when I came out of the restroom, somebody said, "Who are you?" And I told him my name. And so then it got in the newspapers that, you know, I was doing that. But it was mainly my friend out of Boston who handled the case, but I'm proud of what he did. And here's why. You know, we have to have faith that this country, that there's one set of justice and one set of laws for everybody. And when we had in that case, for example, parents bribing the test proctors $15,000 so that they could change the scores of their children. So kids came in, they didn't even know. They took a test. They didn't even know their parents then had an illegal side deal with the proctor and bribed them to change their answers. And then they submitted the work he did to sort of stand up for fairness in that respect.
I just wanted to ask you about that because a lot of candidates mention the law should be fair for everyone, but it is not the African American experience that criminal justice is blind when it comes to a lot of us. She sometimes peeks under her a blindfold before issuing justice to people of color. So I definitely, you know, that was definitely a case that was not about people of color, and a lot of people. I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak on that.
You know, that's one of the reasons why that case I think was important, because it was about the most privileged, the wealthiest, the most powerful, thinking that they could kind of bend the law and that the law didn't apply to them. And so I was proud that they sent the message that, you know, there is, you know, one United States criminal code, and it applies even if you're a famous celebrity. And so I think that was important to see. And by the way, that's why I was proud to work on major financial frauds, because, you know, there's this attitude that some people mistakenly have that we should be easier on the person who, you know, rips off his friends and relatives. And in my case, I took on folks who I charged 2 Israeli brothers who were tricking members of their own synagogue into basically a Madoff type of scam. They would recruit them at synagogue and then rip them off. I charged a man who ripped off the elderly members of his church and stole $13 million or $11 or $12 million from his own church. And so I was very proud to work on that stuff, because again, there's this misconception that, you know, like we should only be hard on folks that are doing drug crimes or gang crimes. And we should. Sometimes you need to protect communities, and people of color, by the way, they deserve also to live in communities that are free of gang violence and free of major drug dealing. So it's important to do those cases. But I was very proud to also work with a different profile, so to speak, where, you know, we can say justice applies to everybody. And I was aggressive in charging and pursuing real sentences for folks who were doing those kinds of frauds.
When we were talking about COVID and prevention, preventative health and all that, and people having access to health care, I see in the comment section there's a lot of talk between your campaign and Mondare's campaign, and some questions, and some people that are listening, wondering if you are for Medicare for all, the public option. Where do you stand as far as all that is concerned? I see people speaking for you. I'd rather you speak for yourself.
It's funny you mentioned Mondare. Mondare was for Medicare for all. Then he came out and said he wasn't for it anymore. Then he said he was for it again. I don't know if COVID changed his mind or he got some poll that told him to change his mind, but I'll tell you what my view has been from the beginning, which is we should have a public option that competes with health insurance plan so that people can choose it if they want, and it also covers the 8.5% that doesn't have coverage now. I'm not in favor, and by the way, I think most folks in the race share this view. I'm not in favor of forcing everybody off their existing private plans now. Why? Because in unions and all these things, they made deals with their employers and their unions for decades that they planned for, and they want their private care, and I'm not going to take it away from them. My hope is you can get onto the Medicare for those who want it, a public option, right? And then you can sign up and hopefully it will work. And my hope is it outcompetes private insurance. I hope in 10 years we got single payer. I'm just not going to force everybody, every teacher, every union member off their plan that they have right now. And by the way, the district doesn't want it.
Well, how did and how would they do that when these are binding obligations between the unions and the municipalities?
Yeah, I'll tell you how. So it's a great question. So right now, unions fight for these good healthcare plans that they want, right?
Right.
My hope is that here's the problem I have with private health insurance and why I'd like to see it go away eventually. The way private health insurance companies make money is they take in trillions in premiums, like any insurance company. And then they make their shareholders happy when they pay out less money than they take in. Mm-hmm. So their job is to take in money and pay out less. And the difference is the profits that the shareholders get. And my hope is that over time, if we have a good public option that does its job the right way and doesn't cause all of us, we all had that experience, you go get some procedure, then you go back to your insurance company and they deny it. And then you go back to your doctor and they say, go back to them. And it's like you're going back and forth, running yourself ragged. And my point is, I'd like to get to a point where the public option is so much more pleasant and efficient and helpful to the average customer and hospital and healthcare provider that the unions, the next round of collective bargaining, don't ask for that health insurance anymore. They say, you know what, company? You know what, public school system? Don't give us that private plan anymore. we're going to go into the public option. Instead, give us higher wages, and you won't have to pay for the health insurance. That's my hope. So it'll be my hope is the public option will be so much better that the unions won't ask for that anymore, and then they'll just get higher wages instead. But let's see what happens. But what I'm not going to do is pull the rug out from under them tomorrow. And so if that's what Mondier wants, that's up to him.
What for people, just for our audience, people just hearing and seeing you for the first time, how can they contact you? Website, social media, you know, maybe want to volunteer or donate or whatever. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, let me just check my own Twitter name real fast, because my thank God Twitter's not real life. My website is adamschleifer.com. So ADAM, S like Sam, CHLEI, F like Frank, ER.com. And then my Twitter is at Adam Schleifer New York, Schleifer New York, or Adam Schleifer New York. And we have, I think, the same on Facebook. So we're on all of the platforms, and we encourage folks to come. And you'll see on our website we have a bunch of policy statements and all sorts of other information about how folks can engage if they want to. And I hope folks will do so, because that's what this is all about. The other thing I encourage folks to do is watch some of the debates. They're free to participate in for the candidates. They're free for folks to watch. They're free to look up on YouTube and Facebook Live and Facebook after they're done. And it's a great way to engage if folks have the time.